Well, here we are, my very first attempt at a blog. Lots of people doing blogs at the moment about all kinds of stuff. I was thinking to myself, well, I'm a filmmaker, so I should have a crack at a blog, but not necessarily do stuff about filmmaking. I actually think the most useful thing for me to do, or for anybody to do, is to basically kind of reflect on experience. And if we have experiences that can help, or if we have experiences that entertain, or amuse, or inform, then that's kind of what I'm really kind of aiming at in this blog. So I'm in a shed. Okay. We might do stuff about sheds. Just a few feet from here, there's actually some nesting birds. We might do something about that as well. So whether it's nature, or sheds, or cars, and all kinds of stuff, what I'm going to attempt to do is each day basically pick a topic and then can talk about it. If you find it entertaining and informative, brilliant. If you don't, you can move on and watch some cats skateboarding while eating soup at the end of the day. And if we see that, if we do see a cat skateboarding while eating soup, what I'll do is I'll turn the camera around and we'll catch that cat. There's a lot of cats actually come around this shed quite a lot of wildlife around here. Birds, cats, you name it. Very few buffalo. We've not had a buffalo in about 3 years, but if a buffalo appears, then again I'll turn the camera around and we'll concentrate on that buffalo. So we're here because we're in lockdown. Okay, lockdown, yeah. Who would ever thought you'd ever heard a word like lockdown? I think I ever came across the word lockdown in the Dustin Hoffman movies in the 90s called Outbreak. It's about a big Ebola outbreak in Central Africa. The first time I ever came across the term lockdown. Anyway, what I thought I might do today is, possibly not a cheery subject, but I thought I might actually talk about the theme of apocalypse. Okay? Religious people amongst you will be very aware of the apocalypse, particularly within the Bible. We have, as a human race, faced many apocalypses. Certainly within my lifetime, I have known parents and grandparents who fought in World War I and World War II, and basically survived on the home front during all that. Also within my lifetime, I know grandparents who told me as a boy about the Spanish flu in 1918. In fact, I remember one of my grandmothers who wanted to be a hairdresser, her parents basically saying to her, no, we won't allow you to become a hairdresser because we're actually frightened that if you become a hairdresser you'll actually be more inclined to die from Spanish flu. So, apocalypse is something which has certainly been around. I don't know to what extent people think about it. Certainly in my youth it was around. The Cold War existed from the end of World War II right up to probably about 91. We were on a daily basis faced with nuclear annihilation. Soviet missiles at their quickest could actually knock out all UK cities within about 4 minutes. So certainly within the lifetime of many of us, we either consciously or subconsciously were aware that missiles were basically pointed at cities in the west and cities in the east, and that nuclear annihilation was a very strong possibility. How did people deal with that? I think a lot of people dealt with it by completely ignoring it and having nothing to do with it. Some people dealt with it by joining peace movements like CND. My way of dealing it, I suppose, was very much a kind of minority way of dealing with it. I, as a 15-year-old, actually enlisted in the Royal Observer Corps, which was an auxiliary branch of the Royal Air Force, and our job was to man underground bunkers and to basically prepare for nuclear war, to take radiation readings, to measure the strength of each bomb, to take weather reports, and also to provide an early warning system for the residents within the area in which our post was actually based in. So I bring this up because basically, is there anything I learnt from my 11 years in the Observer Corps and having to deal with nuclear apocalypse that is kind of relevant to today? But first of all, to give you some kind of background on the Royal Observer Corps, it existed from the 1920s right up to 1991 when it was stood down. It was stood down because the government regarded nuclear war as being remote. The Soviet Union had collapsed, and the John Major government, in my opinion, foolishly decided to basically get rid of this country's civil defence warning network, which consisted of the Observer Corps. It also consisted of things like sirens, which used to be on schools and hospitals, and the whole apparatus which was there to warn the public about impending nuclear attack. That was all done away with to basically save about £15 million way back in kind of 91, 92. Observer Corps itself, as I say, was set up in the 20s, massively expanded during World War II. During World War II, the whole country was covered in posts, and the Observer Corps' job back then was to basically record and monitor and observe every single German bomber formation that basically came into the UK. The whole country was divided into grids, and at kind of 15-mile intervals there would be posts basically tracking every aircraft that came into UK airspace. All that information would be passed on to Fighter Command, and Fighter Command would use that information to basically kind of direct the fighters onto the German bomber formations. We hear a lot about radar. Radar played an important part during the Battle of Britain, but it was actually the volunteers of the Observer Corps, particularly posts in the south of England, who were actually in a position to basically allow the RAF to basically marshal its limited resources. Within Scotland, some of you might be aware of Rudolf Hess, who was Hitler's deputy. He infamously flew to Scotland in 1941 to try and basically cut a deal whereby Germany and Britain would make peace and basically both fight the Soviet Union. He assumed the Duke of Hamilton had a lot of power, and he basically flew to the Duke of Hamilton's residence to try and kind of cut this deal. But along the way he crashed and he was imprisoned, and the Observer Corps played a big part in basically tracking his aircraft as it kind of entered kind of UK airspace. Moving on, as nuclear war became a possibility, as we moved into the 50s, the Observer Corps was given a new rule. That rule was to go underground, to man underground bunkers, and within these complexes the observers would be trained to basically observe, reconnoitre, and basically kind of take various scientific measurements, which should be used by the military, which should be used by civilian powers. It was everything from our information would be passed on to the RAF, so the RAF would know which airfields are still intact. In terms of civilian populations would know which towns and cities had a high radiation dose and which towns and cities didn't. That was part of the theory of what we did. At its peak, the Observer Corps had 24,000 members of the Corps. Posts at 15-mile intervals stretching from the Shetlands all the way to Land's End. It was quite a comprehensive system. Each post would be about 30 feet underground, solid concrete covered in earth. There would be accommodation for 3 observers, food and water supplies for a month. So basically, as observers, in terms of thinking about the apocalypse, we weren't really able to think beyond 28 days. There's a pun there if you think about the zombie movie 28 Days Later, because nobody really gave much thought to what happened after 28 days. But certainly from the point of manning up and reaching the post and getting inside the post and locking the big kind of metal door at the top of the post, we were in there for 28 days, and having to deal with the impending apocalypse. So